Okay, good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order a special meeting of the City of South Pasadena Mobility and Transportation Infrastructure Commission. This is Wednesday evening, September 8th. What time is it? Looks like it's 6:07 or so. Go ahead and get started. Liana, would you please call roll?
Chair Abelson.
Here.
Commissioner Fisher.
Here.
Commissioner Hughes.
Here.
Commissioner Liu.
Here.
And Commissioner Dunlap.
Here.
And Council Liaison Primet.
Here.
Great, thank you, Leon. And I'll also note that we have Public Works Director Shahid Abbas here, Deputy Public Works Director Ghassan Shaleh here, and special guest Samuel Znaimer, Senior Planner with Alta Planning and Design here as well. I think that rounds out the group. Let's see. I think we have to go through the agenda here. We have the Pledge of Allegiance. So Commissioner Hughes, would you please lead us?
Yes, everyone please stand. We have our imaginary flag, hand on your heart, ready to begin. I pledge allegiance
to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic
for which it
for which it
stands,
stands,
the Republic,
one nation,
under
under
God,
God,
one nation,
indivisible,
under God,
with
indivisible,
liberty and justice for all.
justice for all.
liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Commissioner Hughes. All right, well, we're fortunate enough not to have a set of minutes to review. So we're going straight into our primary item tonight, which is our action item number 1 on the agenda, contract amendment with Alta Planning for adding additional streets to the Slow Streets program. I guess we'll start with staff.
Yes, Chair, if you might, I just give you a brief background, and I appreciate Mr. Znaimer is here on our request, to help us guide us through the process. We set aside, we had some leftover money in the Slow Street project, so because we could not deploy the bollard portion of those items, and we had about 114,000 leftover project. So the council made a decision that we can use this money and split them into 2 halves and use half of the portion, which is about $57,000, to add a couple of more streets to the Slow Street program, and rest half of the money, $46,000 with leftover to procure the additional traffic control devices, and so we can implement the design on those Slow Street project. So I want to just make a couple of important points here. The schedule is of key importance to us, this one, because the funding are going to expire on December 31st. If we are unable to invoice Metro by December 31st, this project will not be extended for another year. So the Metro has already refused staff request for giving us an extension. The original schedule, which is submitted by our consulting team, was based upon 6 weeks of design time, and which we don't have the luxury, so they have to condense this to make it work within our time frame. And also I want the commission to keep in mind that once we design the project, then we have to procure the additional equipment. So we have to go through the city procurement process to procure the equipment, and we can deploy it on the street. Stock equipment, which is like a taping, barricade, A-frames, I don't think so that should be a problem. As we go along with the project, simultaneously we can identify the need, given and take in the same ballpark, we can procure that equipment simultaneously. But the equipment which is based on the design, we have to work very closely with our consulting team and make sure we finish the project in time, which give us sufficient time to procure and install the equipment. In speaking with, I think I had a discussion with our consulting team last week, immediately after the council approved it, just to get an idea, because we have to get into a contract amendment with LTAP planning, I just wanted to know what is the realistic expectation, how many more streets we can add, given 57,000 additional. So I was told I think we had a discussion on Monday also, me and our consulting team, and I think at the most, they think they can accommodate 2 streets at the most, depending upon what street we select. So I just see if we keep that in mind. So we only select the street which we are able to accommodate. Which I will recommend, instead of selecting two street, you select little more street, maybe 4 or 6 street, and prioritize those. So once we negotiate that contract change with our consulting team, we have some flexibility. And if we can add more street, we should be able to add more street at that time. So the contract schedule is, and the way the contract works, we already have sent our contract to our consulting team for their signature, and they have to submit their papers back to us with the insurance and the bonds. It will come back to us, and then a PO will issue. That can take about 3 to 4 weeks, depending upon their bonding company or insurance company sends us the certificate. That means earliest we can give them a notice to proceed officially will be somewhere in late September or early October. That will leave us total 3 months with us to do everything and finish the project. I think that Mr. Znaimer can explain us more, because they are the one who has to eventually accommodate this schedule, that tight schedule. So do you have anything?
Yeah, I can definitely add something to that. So we came to this approximation for multiple reasons. One, we just recently done a recent Slow Streets project, which costs about $24,000 from beginning to end. It takes a little bit more than just some planning looks. Obviously, we have engineering involved. And while my bill rate might be something digestible for the city, our engineers' bill rates are significantly higher. So that is one of our main cost drivers. Additionally, with this truncated schedule that we're now faced with, it is going to require more staff to be used right away. So what is in the proposal now is going to have to be staffed up so we can get this compressed schedule completed. So we're going to be queuing in more people from my firm to be working on this so we can do simultaneous planning efforts to try to speed this up as much as possible. If you saw the proposal, we originally thought the kickoff would be sometime in July. So truncating this schedule means we're going to be having to work faster with more people up front in terms of my staff. And also it means that we're going to have to make some decisions quickly and might not have as much public outreach length as we had in the original proposal. So things are going to have to get truncated all over the place to ensure we can meet any time of schedule and have this project in the ground for at least a month. So we're now faced with what we originally proposed with a 3-month demonstration is likely going to be truncated due to our need to actually plan this project out, procure the items, and actually install, evaluate, and then eventually remove. As all of these elements are within at least our contract space was to be installed, monitored, and removed. If things change throughout the contract life to change any of that stuff, we can look at how we can have cost savings to build onto this plan. But everything's going to be really tight and everything's going to have to move really fast. So your input now will be essential in making us understand what streets you guys want to have in here so that I can quickly get back to my engineering team so we can assess exactly how much it might cost for those streets and the length of those streets, just because some of those things are going to be cost drivers. If it's a more difficult street to plan for, which require more engineering time, it might limit the length of the segment that we're going to plan. The number of intersections also comes into play. The more intersections, the more materials. Additionally, the more planning space and more engineering sheets that have to be created. So all of those things are factored into where we are coming in terms of the additional 2 streets with the $57,000. In terms of the other elements of this, primarily looking at Mission Street and then the undetermined 3rd Street. That was originally was our number 1 street within the proposal. Those ones are obviously still on the table. We're still moving forward with that assumption of utilizing Mission Street and then 1 other residential street. So altogether, there will be 3 residential streets as part of this program with the additional funds. If you guys obviously have any questions, please feel free. the pepper me while you guys are deliberating about which streets you want to add to this. Thank you, guys.
Sam, can I just ask a question for clarity? The 167,812, the initial expenditure and allotment, you're saying that includes the mission plus one street?
One street, correct.
And then the 57,000 that would be the adjunct, the amended, would be for possibly two more streets.
Correct, depending on length and segment, but yes, potentially up to 2 streets.
Okay, so I had a quick question just on some of the math to be clear. So we're starting with 420,000 allocated. We have the 167,812. And then the Mission Street was another 48,000, which took us to 215,812, which gives a balance of 204,188. But is that because you're considering another street in there, which is why we were actually looking at a balance of 114?
I think that comes out for, so within our proposal, we're not procuring any of the items. The city will be. So they're going to utilize the remaining budget that isn't allocated to Alta, or because ITERRAS is also involved in terms of a traffic study separate from what we're working on.
Okay.
So that we have our portion, which is the 167 that you talked about,
Right.
which was part of the original proposal.
Right.
Now we have this extra
57,118, which gives you a 225.
approximately, yeah.
Correct.
Right about
Okay.
that, like to get all of that planning work and engineering work, installation, evaluation, and feedback. So all of those elements are captured within that lump sum.
Okay, the other point of clarification is, do you have concerns right now on getting materials? Because
do
I
for
understand that,
anything.
you know, it's very difficult. I'm hearing we're having difficulty getting materials. Is that something we should really be concerned about, or is that going to be a factor? Or would Metro understand if we say we're doing something, but we can't because of a material issue? Would we have leeway there? And I guess that's a question for Shahid or.
It's probably a combination question. I can answer in terms of procurement of materials. You're absolutely right. It has been difficult. I was just finishing up my 3rd demonstration project of this summer, and we had a lot more trouble procuring planters in this round than we did during the early season when we were ordering in like March. So it is getting tougher to get some of the bigger materials, some of the planter sets, some of the other, like, I would call them heavier delineators, or like some of the more crash ready type elements, those things that might be utilized more on Mission Street. In terms of delineators and tape and A-frame signage, those ones we can probably readily procure because those ones are a bit cheaper and just honestly, they've been more available. But the delineators did get a delay on us when we were doing our Hermosa Beach project. So instead of being a 4-week time, it ended up taking 6 weeks. So there have been some delays, though. From what we are hearing from our manufacturer, or from the person we were ordering from, that was partially due to the Suez Canal issue. So that was a conflated one, but there are still definite issues in the supply chain that are causing delays in procurement, and honestly being able to get some of the bigger products and some of the, like, I'd say more crashable or durable products have been challenging.
Okay, thank you.
So as far as the funding is concerned, the Metro has said they've not been able to extend the funding for us. Our deadline is 31st. So we have to meet that deadline. So we already approached them, and they said that's the deadline which
But if we knew we were purchasing something, so we got an order into Acme Company for delineators, to use that as an example, and we know that they're going to go in, but they haven't arrived by December 31 because they're back ordered. You can't get them, you know, they're slow boat. Could we still bill for them, or does everything have to be done, set in the ground that they could audit for the funding? I guess that's my question.
So the Metro funding is, we have to receive the equipment in place. We have to have equipment either in our control. If it is not in our control, it has to be in the control of the contractor and should be available on the project site before we really receive, before we pay the invoice. That's the policy, and that's how the audit and inspections will be done. So if anything beyond that, that's the violation of existing policies, city policies, Metro, and the state policies. So which will be a bigger question, you know, we have not done that way.
Okay.
So, but that equipment, yeah, we can, if the equipment is in our possession, it is not installed, our equipment is in the contractor inspection, and the staff has inspected the equipment and can assure it that's available in the project site available. So we can make a pro forma payment for that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you both. John, Commissioner Fisher.
Yes, thank you. So Alta Planning designs, the city procures, who installs?
We will, the consulting team. So it's a combination of Alta Planning Design, Active SGV, and Arroyo Group that are all part of the project team for this. So it will be a combination of all three of our staff on site installing these elements, along with traffic control, which will be either procured by the city or supplied by the city in terms of their own staff. I'm not sure how we're going to approach it for each different element. I would assume some of potentially the residential streets, we might utilize public works staff and some light materials to provide some traffic control, whereas on Mission Street, we'll likely have to procure somebody like right away to come in to help shut down streets as we install.
All right, thank you. So we received a list of streets. Is the list where we think we have a problem, or is there some background behind these streets where we have some either collision data or speed data or whatever to know that there's a problem on these streets?
So those streets, I think a chair in his email explained very well. I think he has a more history than me on this project, because Public Works only got involved recently. Before that, it was handled by planning. I think the planning department worked with Active SGV about 2 years back when they started on the slow street, and they came back with some network of street, which basically, my understanding, is drawn out of the city's bicycle master plan. And then they interconnected the grid system, so make sure the traffic is not shifted from one street to another. So if the street is left in between, they include that street in the mix, and that's how they came back with the grid pattern. That was understanding at that point in time, and otherwise the data was not collected as part just for the selection of these streets. And this is just working with Active SGC, looking at the bicycle master plan and input for our citizens at that time. I think the input came through the planning commission at that point in time.
Okay, so I guess we haven't seen that, but it's available. So what would a minimal installation look like on a street versus a more elaborate one?
Yeah, I mean, if you're thinking minimal, what we had in mind was utilizing tape, like striping tape, delineators, and A-frame signage. These have been the traditional hallmarks so far of Slow Streets residential programs. So that would be what I consider a minimal installment, whereas Mission Street is going to have to honestly be planned far more. It's obviously a commercial street in a district that has a lot of traffic, or not a lot, but a good amount of car traffic. So that one is going to take different materials, which include, are not limited to, obviously, movement of those K-rails that are existing right there.
But Sam, yeah. Just for brevity, I'm not concerned with Mission Street because it's not a residential street.
Yeah.
I'm concerned with, on a residential street, what would a greater effort look like beyond tape and delineators and type 1 barricades?
I mean, for a Slow Streets program, I wasn't thinking of anything honestly far beyond that one, outside of striping, tape, delineators, and having signage. I haven't seen other Slow Streets programs put in things like chicanes or pots or other elements within the right-of-way space as much as we've seen throughout the country. So this is, I think, what we were planning to do in terms of Slow Streets, both because it can be replicatable, but also because this is what we've seen in terms of practice.
Okay, sounds reasonable. So if most of the residential streets will have the tape, delineators, barricade signs, how did we come up with 57,000 to do only 2 streets? That seems very high for that type of installation.
For us, it's mostly because there's all these elements that go with it. If it was just designing a street, it might be one thing. We also have outreach. We have multiple edits that are going to come in from the city. We're going to have the install time ourselves in terms of actual staff. and those things will take full days. We have multiple in terms of outreach elements that we have to complete for any of these types of installations. And then outside of that, we also have evaluation and closing out the project, aka removal. So all of those things put together will easily get us honestly up to 57,000 depending on length and honestly what it takes to design that street.
Okay, thank you. So from my perspective, based on what I heard, I would prefer that we have several streets that we list, whether it's 4 or 6 or whatever, where we could put in minimal controls so that we spread the benefits throughout the city on residential streets that do not take you to major attractions. So that would kind of be my preference. And with that, I'll let someone else have the floor.
Thank you, Commissioner Fisher. I thought what we do, just for the order of affairs here, is we'd first finish up any questions. I see Commissioner Dunlap has his hand up, so I'll get to you in just a moment. Finish up our questions for Sam, and then we'll check to see if there is any public comment, and then we can go into our discussion. So I just wanted to give you a sort of a sense of the order. With that, Commissioner Dunlap.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Sam, for that update. Are there quick build or slow street elements that can be installed or that have a lifespan longer than the 1 to 2 months? You mentioned that these, the minimum we would do would be like 1 month, but are there ones that possibly could stay up for a longer amount of time and then the city remove it with their forces sometime next year?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely delineators can stay in for longer than a month. The Hermosa Beach project I just worked on, they still are in, and I installed that all the way back in May. So they have a longer span. It's not so much the actual ability for those to stay in place. It's more that we are, as part of our agreement, we were to remove them as well. So that was just, I was only going off of what we're based on in terms of proposal elements. So some of those ones can stay. I would recommend that you don't go with tape if you want it to last longer than a month. I don't know if there's a possibility of using the paint truck to do a high visibility crosswalk or paint an edge stripe after it's been designed and replace the tape at a later date, kind of to reinforce the treatment. And it's something the city could take on after the fact. But I would say I hadn't envisioned this one to go beyond that life, but definitely we're going to have designs that stay beyond the life. So if materials fade or change, you get, the city could, with those same design elements, go in with a more permanent treatment. So that is the great thing about some of these things. You'll be left with actual engineering drawings for as-built. So it's, you can really go in and just do these to be longer term treatments beyond the useful life of this project. So that's one of the benefits of it as well.
One thing which keep in mind, as far as the temporary tape is concerned, given the existing condition of payment condition of our street, they're not going to last long. So rest everything is that is going to stay, is up to up. We can maintain it for a year. I think those are just the equipment. So that's the only issues.
Thank you, Director Boss. And but it sounds like something like the delineators could stay a little bit longer. They're probably a little bit more durable than tape.
Yes, yeah, they can stay up a little bit. I think they have a life that is longer, especially if we're going to use pad burn downs, epoxy pad burn downs.
Yeah, and thanks also for sharing kind of what the minimum might look like. I know that some jurisdictions have just done the 2x3 sign on the delineator that's either in the middle on the center line if there's adequate room, or either it's in the parking lane. Those typically can be deployed on a larger scale. Commissioner Liu kind of started that trend in Southern California, so he can take all the credit for that. But I wondered is that part of the package, or are we really kind of focused?
It definitely can be. So we were focused a bit more on adding in a bit more design and a bit more intervention to make it more, honestly, to be a more actual usable street for active transportation. I do think if you find the right streets And I think there's a lot more categories that have to go in it and caveats, including collision history, average speeds that you see on that street. You could potentially feel comfortable enough with an A-frame sign with some delineators kind of framing it out as potentially for some of these lower volume streets that might not be through streets. They might not be streets that we would commonly utilize on our grid, something not like an El Centro, but more like a part of like a Chelton way, something, or maybe not Chelton. Chelton might be a little too, what's it, cut off, but there are other streets off of, yeah, say a street off of Oak Street, maybe not Oak Street itself, as what you would consider maybe low volume, if not Milan or something like that, or Marengo, where you're going to get volumes, but something very low volume, you could see that minimal design that you talked about and that we've seen in Pasadena. But what we were proposing was something with a little bit more, not teeth, but a little bit more engineering to it and a bit more intervention in terms of planning and install.
Well, thank you. And I think from an engineering background, I always enjoy seeing things that begin to address the problems. You know what I mean? Like a little bit more thought in engineering and a little bit more transformative. But thank you.
Sam, I wanted to pick up on what Commissioner Dunlap asked, because I shuddered a little when you talked about the timing and the fact that you know, it sounds like at best the installations would be in for like a month, and then part of your, at least the existing contract, is to remove them. And I think you basically covered it just a few minutes ago. I just wanted to confirm, because I would be very disappointed, and I'm sure others would, to have all this work put in and these measures to be implemented, and then, you know, weeks later they're removed. That would be very disappointing. And I like what you said a few minutes ago about how this is the groundwork for maybe permanent installations. So it's a long way of asking the question. If we want to keep these installations around after your contract is over, and your contract currently says remove, is that something we will have to address with City Council and ask for a contract amendment so that these installations are not removed when the contract terminates?
You know, I honestly don't know for sure in terms of the city process for making that amendment.
No, it's more, here's the thing, and I'm expressing my own opinion. I don't want these devices removed after a month. That's just my feeling. So if that's the sense of the commission, then we need to do something about it, right? Because as we sit here, your contract says to remove, yeah?
I mean, at least from what I submitted, yeah, it does say remove, because we were planning to have those things out of the way after our contract was done, so it wouldn't put burden on staff to then have to remove it without being paid to remove it, type of situation in terms of reimbursed from a grant.
And then to the extent that you aren't removing devices, that is to some extent a cost savings to us, yeah?
Potentially, yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you. Commissioner Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess the question goes back to, you know, if we've got this funding, I think it's sort of like, it would be disappointing for the community to say, look, we're putting all this money in just to take everything out. And is there a way that to kind of dovetail a bit what Commissioner Fisher said, making sure that we can use the money and spread it around as much as possible? And I don't know if there's a component where we look at kind of just, I want to call it the signage opportunity, where we do create the, you know, slow down signs like we see in Pasadena that we can put on some of those streets. I know my neighbors on Bushnell have created their own signs that they put up and bought that say children at play, that they put up on cones, and they put it at one end of the street, the north end at Oak. So when you're making the turn onto Bushnell, you see it, so then they know that they're actually playing in the street. And then they move away, and then you know, at the other end they've got it, and then everyone's cognizant. They've got them kind of where you couldn't go, but you obviously can proceed. But it's with knowing that these children or people, pedestrians, obviously they're going to lose that as it gets darker. But throughout the summer, that was all in place. And last year, when the pandemic of last summer of 2020. So I'm just wondering if there's a way to make sure we could spread the money so that there are some tools and things that could help our community that would continue on, that can again spread out the slow streets or the safety objectives throughout the city.
I mean, we are going to be leaving you guys with obviously signage design, and you guys can re-procure any of those elements at a later date. So don't feel, or you can reuse those elements. The city does have a pot of money that they can utilize to order different materials. That isn't in Alta's control by any means. So that would be up to the city on in terms of making sure that they had extra signage for those ones, but it wouldn't be part of our contract to install those ones unless there was a modification. But I honestly think if it's a signage level type of intervention, that could be installed by staff, depending on if they feel comfortable with it, if it meets city code, and if city council okays that type of new type of treatment. I think those things are all definitely possible. I know, and I'll just caveat this back to even before I was brought on for a contract, when I was chair of this very commission, I believe I might have introduced that idea of seeing what honestly Commissioner Liu put together for the city of Pasadena as a quick turnaround for potential interventions to help bring about the attention to slow streets. So those types of interventions can honestly be put in by staff, but we'll be designing signage as part of this one. So you'll have that signage that you can then order, reorder at later times. It can be part of your future program for slow streets as you expand it. So those are some leave behinds that the city is going to just have from this contract overall that won't be taken by us. They'll have those design sets. They can procure more signage that can be set out by city staff.
Thank you, Sam.
So the
Commissioner Fisher?
permanent, if I
Oh,
may
sorry,
say,
Shahid, go ahead.
the permanent sign has to conform with the California Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices. That's the requirement. The other temporary signs, they can make it, and we have to move it, and the staff can do it easily. That's not a problem. And even if they leave it, we have to remove it. I think we can negotiate. We can take care of that. That I don't think so will require a contract amendment at this point in time. We can handle this thing. All we need is let us know the street so we can continue with the project. Rest issues we can resolve it. It's not even an issue for the staff to move them or continue maintaining them for a certain period of time. Just keep in mind, temporary devices are not there forever. As the time gets by, the maintenance get very heavy, and the staff may not have the capability at some point in time to keep maintaining them. So at some point we have to remove them, but we'll try to keep them as long as possible. I agree. There's no sense keep them 3 months and then remove them. So we can work on it and figure it out.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Fisher.
Yes, I think Director Abbas addressed my question, but I just want to tie it down. So what I'm gathering is that the city would be okay if we removed from the contract removal of these devices and let city staff remove them at the end of their useful service lives. So that could be 1 month after the project. It could be 8 months after the project. We know that after a barricade gets hit 2 or 3 times and you replace it, it gets hit 2 or 3 times again. The reality is that you're not going to replace it a 3rd time. Or if the signs get hit, or if the delineators become dislodged from the pavement, you may put them back once, but you don't want a maintenance issue. So if we left it up to city staff to remove after the useful service life ends, as has been pointed out, that would save some funding in the contract so that Alta would not have to remove the devices, and it could allow the devices to be installed for several months after the project officially ends. So would that be okay, Director Abbas?
Yeah, that will be fine. Only thing is we'll not be able to spend the money after December 31st, whatever we need to procure it. So we can procure some additional equipment for our maintenance before December 31st, and then replace it. I think the neighborhood street should not be a problem. The only street, the Mission Street, if they do, because that have the most aggressive treatments. And if we leave them for a longer period of time, as the traffic is getting back to normal, we already have a congestion issues because of the railroad track. That we may consider removing earlier, at some point in time. Otherwise, we already receive a ton of complaints along Mission Avenue because of the congestion. So if they are contributing to, to adding more congestion along Mission Street, so we can consider them removing earlier. And they may require external help depending upon what kind of improvements we do that. So that removal on Mission Street may require some additional help from a contractor.
Agree, missions project. I wanted
Neighborhood
to,
street should not be a problem. I don't see a problem with it.
wanted to ask one other question regarding the schedule. As Mr. Znaimer said, the design should take about 6 weeks. If I heard correctly, procurement maybe 4 to 6 weeks. The contract 3 to 4 weeks. Do you feel that with these schedules that have been quoted, that you have enough time to get the projects installed by December 31st?
So it is really very tight. So if I said, if by the time we issue them, all the paperwork come back to us and the finance is able to issue them a purchase order to move forward, that will be end of this month or earliest October, because we have not yet received all the procurement back. And then if they take 12 weeks to design, so that's 3 months. Even if they take 2 weeks to design, and if we have to procure the equipment after the design, then we have to go back again, follow the state procurement guidelines or the city procurement guidelines. It's a metro money, we have to follow those guidelines. We have to go back and open bidding to procure the equipment. So we have to receive 3 bids back, because we have to be audited at some point in time and we have to follow those requirements. So that bid, you can see a normal bidding process. We have to open a bid minimum. I think even expedite will require another 6 to 8 weeks. We saw the bid back and then issue another contract. And then on top of that, the supply of the equipment, we don't control what is 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks. So it's really, if you ask me from an engineering point of view or from a professional point of view, it looks a very uphill challenge. But we are proceeding with all the urgency, all the resources we have with that we do possible. So I can't really give you a surety at this point in time, just looking at the challenges we have, that we'll be able to complete everything before December 31st. But that being said, the thing which I can promise you, will leave no stone unturned, myself and working with our consulting team to achieve everything possibly we have in our scope.
Thank you. Is there anything the commission or the council can do to help this process move forward more quickly?
I thought of that. If it's a local money, it's a general fund, the council, I would have requested council to waive our procurement policy and let me go and procure directly, from that. But this is not a general money. This is the metro fund. It has to be audited. The one is the requirement is there, and we have to follow their process. So I really cannot answer this question, but my experience shows that we cannot waive the requirement of procurement, which came as part of this funding. I've never experienced that, waiving that. So I think at this time, I will say that we have to follow that procurement policies, which is instituted by the local government, regional government.
Thank you.
I see Commissioner Hughes's hand up, but I just wanted to ask Shahid a question on this very topic. Would it be possible to, I know we've already asked Metro about extending the end of the year deadline and they said, unfortunately, no. Do you think it's worth reaching out to them to ask if perhaps some of their procurement requirements can be waived in light of the tight timing with which we're confronted?
So we can ask them, nothing, we lose nothing by asking. We don't ask, we gain nothing, So we will ask them, but what I say, it's too early because they just refused it. So wait, once we get into the procurement process, so we can show them some progress and the reason why we are asking. I think we have a stronger case and sympathy, and then see what they say. So I cannot promise they say, but they gave us a date for certain, because this funding was meant for something else. And they wanted to obligate the funding else, and they say they have made one-time waiver in our case, but I sure that's already at the back of my mind. Once we get to the point, we will ask them, and then we have a letter from the procurement. We'll show them all the documents we've met it, and hopefully, I think that will be the right time to go back.
Great, that sounds great. Thank you. Commissioner Hughes.
It's a question maybe for Sam. Sam, if right now the plan is the focus mostly is on obviously the Mission Street project and then the one other street and then possibly another street. Does that make sense for us to be looking at that many objectives, or is that your team gonna, obviously you mentioned you're gonna gear up for more concentration, more work, more expeditious, of handling of the process and design and procurement and all of that. But would it make sense for us to narrow with the concerns we have in timing, procurement, materials, et cetera? Or do you think what we're discussing is feasible?
I honestly believe that additional 2 streets is definitely feasible in terms of being able to design them and procure the materials, because ideally we would order a stock of those types of materials, of delineator posts, a slew of tape, a set of signage, so that we could then deploy more readily. And also at that point in time, hopefully provide Public Works with enough leeway or extra orders of, say, delineators and tape or something else to make sure that they have some maintenance materials as well. So I think the actual residential streets isn't as big a burden overall as honestly the planning of Mission Street, because there's so much that has to go into that one. So I do think that the additional extra streets can be handled by my additional planners and engineering staff that I'll bring on for the project. Mission Street is what is kind of driving some of the length of the schedule, honestly, because that's going to take procurement time. That's going to take additional outreach beyond what we're doing for residential streets as well.
And Sam, where are you seeing your demarcation of Mission? Are you thinking from Orange Grove to Fair Oaks? Are you considering even further west to beyond like Trader Joe? Where are you seeing your demarcation of the project itself?
Approximately between Fair Oaks and Orange Grove.
Okay.
So that is the extent that we looked at in terms of our scoping for
Okay.
this project. Going beyond that will be getting very costly.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Dunlap.
Thank you, Chair Abelson. Kind of been thinking about this, and something that I've been thinking about. We've talked about a couple streets or 2 streets, and it seems like there's a desire to for more people in the city to see more things across probably more than just a couple locations, and certainly understanding the limitations with schedule, with cost, et cetera, et cetera. I want to get as much out of everyone's way so that everyone can do their work and make decisions as quick as possible so that we can see this. I wonder, an idea that I had maybe to look at or suggest to look at would be maybe street isn't the right thing to think about, like a long street, but maybe you could think about 5 intersections or 5 locations. I throw out the number 5 because I think there are 5 public schools in the city with the elementary schools and the high school and the middle school.
Yes.
We could do some sort of this is not direction, this is just an idea, some sort of quick build treatment with curb extensions, work with the school to possibly fill it in with art. It could be like a collaborative thing, get the school involved, work with the kids on traffic safety, and just kind of be a nice kind of community event. I just want to throw that out as an idea. Sam, you're certainly the expert with this, as well as your partners with the Row Group and Active SGV. So I'm sure that whatever you all come up with will be super awesome. But yeah, maybe I want to throw it, instead of not limit ourselves maybe to just 2 streets in the city, but possibly like a suite of things on maybe a more micro scale. That might be a question for you, Sam. Would something like that be possible, or do we really need to just focus on 2 streets?
I think in terms of scoping this out and making sure we have a proper cost bid so we can put this into the contract correctly, I would say focus on those streets, because that's the only way I can properly scope this. If we are going to be looking at more of a suite of things at different intersections, that's kind of a different project altogether. And it doesn't mean it's not possible by any means. I've installed those exact things you're talking about at multiple areas. But it's a very different approach and working with the school and having that extra outreach element and coordination is also money. I don't mean to obviously say that everything costs money, obviously, for any of these projects. But as you go through those steps and create more meetings and more layers to it in terms of complexity with meeting with schools, doing a quick build at a school at 5 locations, I think it becomes a little bit more complicated. And at least from what I've seen so far, is the time materials contract and making sure that we meet within whatever was adopted by the city that was approved by Metro. Probably has some rules and regulations, but I can't speak to exactly how contracts have to be constructed because I don't know the full extent of the grant and those requirements. So it's hard to speak to those elements exactly without knowing some of the contracting rules that come with the grant, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and Commissioner Fisher, I'll get to you in a second. I just want to remind everybody at this point, we're just asking questions of staff or Sam, and then we'll enter into discussion. So with that, Commissioner Fisher.
Yes, thank you. So I wanted to follow up on Commissioner Dunlap's question. I can appreciate that you need to have public outreach. You need to let the community know what you're doing. On the other hand, if we, let's say, selected 4 streets, 5 streets, where we have very similar controls of tape, delineators, and barricade signs, would it be possible to have to save funds and just have 1 or 2 public meetings that would include those 4 streets, rather than have a customized meeting for Street 1, which might have very similar controls to Street 2? Is there a scale on which we could benefit from this?
Trying to think if there would be a scale for that. With the addition of just 2 or 3 meetings, I'm not sure if there's a giant scale that you'll be achieving by lumping together, because we'd be scoping out to just essentially try to minimize the amount of people anyways from the project team hosting these meetings. We'd obviously be relying some level on city staff as well to make sure to supplement us so that we could make sure we have these cost savings. The street that we did in Long Beach that required about 24,000 was literally only up for 3 days. So I do want to make sure that we understand that there are a lot of steps to implementing any of these ones. And as much as I can give you guarantees here, I'm not an authority to be able to sign over for my company. So I can give you guys ideas and potential scope and why there's 2 streets. But there's a whole process on the back end, and the longer we take for it, I will say, is the longer the procurement process for our contractors. So no matter what we decide tonight, there is going to be some level of us having to scope specifically for this, and then to create something that Shahid can then utilize to create the finalized contract. So there are some steps to this, and if we have more and more ambiguity without being able to either create this own line item for it, or unless we word it very nondescriptly, that it can be used as all these interchangeable pieces. I gave that original price quote understanding it would be 2 streets with potential segmentation of them. I would have to go back to my team to get a proper price quote for 5 intersections, or trying to piecemeal different elements together. So I'm just saying this in terms of practicality for length of the amendment process. I would hope to get more resolution today, and the more resolution we get, the easier this process is overall for us to get under contract. But I don't obviously want to compromise the goals. So I mean, this is the game of making sure that we have enough time to do everything we want to do, and ensuring that we can implement projects that have benefits without trying to, I guess, overplan it before we even get under contract. So I guess I just don't want to lose more time is my biggest concern. And right now, schedule's driving everything. As much as cost and fee does, schedule is going to drive everything at this point in time because of the compressed schedule we're going to have to deal with. So that's kind of been my goal over everything, including why I'm here tonight and making sure we can move this process along so that we can get under contract as fast as possible and get designing work done ASAP.
Thank you.
And if I may say, I think that treatment at the intersection will be more complex than a normal street. And that will require more time and procurement of equipment, which may not be readily available. And secondly, without having a proper data, doing any treatment at the intersection, especially along the major corridor, may have other consequences, to do that. We can come back. I think the consultant can come back with a host of other treatments, but they will not have the liberty or the pleasure of having the data how that treatment will affect other things at the intersection, because that's the most conflict and choking point along the corridor. So if we concentrate on a whole corridor, probably we'll have a bigger and better benefit.
Thank you. So I have a follow-up question, and then hopefully we can move on to discussion. With regard to Commissioner Fisher's comment, putting Mission to Street to the side, which is not the subject of tonight, and I know that's the bigger challenge in project in your contract. Anyway, for these slow street projects on residential streets, we're going to get you a list tonight with prioritization. What level of public outreach are you, Sam, envisioning? Because we're giving you the list. We're talking about temporary interventions, and of course the tight timeline, which comes up a minute by minute here. I'm just trying to get a sense of what kind of outreach we're talking about. Are you planning a whole series of meetings, or is it just sort of some kind of a flyers or correspondence, or a Zoom, and then you move forward, and then there's some after implementation follow-up? Could you just give us sort of a sense of what you're thinking of in terms of
Sure.
outreach for the residential piece of this?
Yeah, I think for this one, as we also scoped within the contract, what we originally thought was selection of the corridor. Once we have the residential street picked out, we would do a door knocker, going through, letting everybody know that this is a street we're planning to do. We have active SGV staff that was planned to do that originally for the one residential street. I'm sure if we have the right segment, we can do it for more streets. After that, we'd have one meeting on site, and then from there, move forward with finalizing design. So we are trying to streamline this as much as possible. And so minimizing the amount of meetings, but giving them enough heads up that this is coming, I think is important. And so I think the one round of just notification that your street was now selected, mixed in with a public meeting, is the minimum we were talking about. And I think should be substantial enough for this type of intervention. Again, one of the other elements that we're hopefully being able to do, as long as cost remains pretty much within the ballpark, is being able to make potential modifications during. So if there is something that we notice going on during the actual treatment process or through the life of the project, some of those elements could be moved around if we see that there's better treatments, or if we're noticing that the demonstration isn't producing what we thought it would. There's that evaluation piece to all of these that we're going to be ongoing throughout this demonstration process. As an example, in my Hermosa Beach project, we decided that one of the mini traffic circle we were using needed a modification. So during the life of the project, we removed some elements, repainted portion of it, and put up different delineators. So those are types of things that could happen during the life of the project that we originally scoped for, because we do have ongoing treatment within the project space. So obviously, if this goes beyond our project life in terms of our contract, then we wouldn't be able to make modifications during the process, but theoretically we would.
Okay, and you said a meeting for at each site, and I wasn't clear on where we landed in response to Commissioner Fisher's question about perhaps one public meeting addressing all the locations.
We are contracted, and at least within our scope, to have two community meetings overall.
Okay.
I personally would not. I would want to have interaction with the street I'm going to put it on, as these are specific to location. These aren't just a generalized, oh, these are going throughout the community. when you're going to be putting in a demonstration project, I've never had success installing anything without having the community immediately affected by it, a contributing factor in how we design, or the fact that it's coming into the community. I personally think that's a recipe for a disaster of a project, to not spend a little bit more time talking to the people you're going to be imposing these treatments on. So I do value the on-site meeting. I do value making sure that I have one-on-one time with those community members in the design process, and making sure that they have eyes on it and know it's coming. So I would feel like I would be doing a disservice to each one of those streets if I decide to loop it all in, make one meeting that you have to attend off-site or at some centralized location, when honestly the community, at least I think, deserves to have the input directly in front of their own street. It's kind of the same thing we did for some of the neighborhood traffic calming ideas, to making sure that we have some sign off from everybody. Obviously, we're not going to go to that threshold that we pointed out within the neighborhood traffic calming plan of like 60% have to sign off. And as this is going to be for only a temporary install, we don't think we have to get to that level. But I do want to make sure there is specific outreach and that they have input into this finalized design for it, because I think it wouldn't do right by the project for us to skip steps in outreach. I do think that's an essential part for demonstration projects, and it's how they go sometimes completely wrong if you don't make that extra effort for outreach.
Okay, so is it fair, and thank you for that. So is it fair to say that the more we implement or use stock type materials, and the more we can make the street segments proximate, the easier and quicker this is going to go?
Yeah, I mean, I think if it's not a unique street with like either big typology changes or blind curves, those are some of the things that require additional engineering. So if it is, say, a segment relatively straight on a easy to honestly design pathway, I think it is a lot easier with stock material to keep designing replicable projects and replicable treatments. So ensuring that those things can be utilized not only for that street, but a like street or a similar street, I think is definitely possible if you're using like very traditional segments of the street grid.
And to the extent the streets are adjacent or connected or otherwise very close to each other, then there's the possibility that you could have one meeting for multiple streets if they're adjacent to each other and connected. Is that a fair?
Potentially, if they're close enough, especially if they are connected, I could feel comfortable doing an on-site meeting for both of them at like a junction point, or if they are literally parallel to each other, though we wouldn't recommend using parallel streets to both get the treatment, if that makes sense. Because originally we want to ensure that whatever we're doing here doesn't then have the same impact everywhere else. So there is some level of evaluation we want to see in this project, and having some level of controls does make it a little bit easier to actually evaluate how these things operate. That makes sense. So we'd have a parallel street, and originally the design of it was so that one street would be the preferred street for active transportation, and it would be the slow street, or some of the other streets would be, wouldn't say preferred for vehicle travel, but that's the other option, so that you don't go down the slow street for a vehicle if you had to get by, type of idea. Granted, the idea is honestly to have it very slow, and so a car going through goes slower and active transportation goes on within somewhat similar space. Obviously, you don't want it in the exact same space, but obviously on the same street and corridor.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sam. Commissioner Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You kind of alluded to this, Sam, but one of the questions I have is, again, you're talking about engaging the community. And my question is focusing on Mission Street, because is the plan, would you think, because obviously with the timeline and we have it condensed, a lot of this will be happening obviously November into December and during the holiday period. Do you think we're going to impact Mission Street at all, where we would have only one lane potentially in having to alternate directions? Or do you think the construction or what you're thinking of impacting the street would have that? Because then that would be really a detriment to the businesses, and we'd want the chamber and everyone to know and get an idea of what we're going to be doing. But I'm just trying to figure out the design, the impact you would potentially have on the street itself.
In
While
terms
this
of,
is, while
oh,
this is, under
Yeah.
construction or under installation.
Shahid, you're muted, Shahid.
Shahid, you're mute. Shahid, you're muted.
We can't hear you.
Okay, so there's a separate study which is done as a part of this project by Terrace, which will figure out whether it's feasible to reduce the street to one lane each direction or no. So that study is going parallel to that. I think Alta will just concentrate on what we have in the parking. And when that study will come back, the results, then we can figure out which, I agree with you, even nowadays with this traffic situation, if the gate is down, the traffic is backing up all the way to Fairworks, and sometimes you can find them as close as to Fremont Avenue. But that study will give us the exact what happens if we do it one lane each direction.
Thank you.
Okay, so I don't see any other hands raised for questions for staff or Sam. So let me open it up for public comment and see if there's anybody who wishes to submit any comment. And Liana, you're muted as well.
I don't
Okay.
have anyone here for public comment, so you're good to go.
Okay, all right. I do see an active SGV window, so I just wanted to make sure that if they wanted to say something, they had the opportunity. Okay, seeing that and based on Liana, what you've reported, we'll go ahead and close public comment. And then we'll proceed with the discussion. I thought I would just lead it off with a couple of thoughts and then open it up. So I just wanted to confirm, did everybody receive my email that Liana was kind enough to circulate and have a chance to read it? And did it make sense? And do you have any questions? Okay, sounds like, looks like no one's responding. So I'm going to guess that means everybody received it and read it. I thought, excuse me, I thought I would just start us off, especially in light of all these really great questions and information from Sam and from Shahid. And, I was thinking about the criteria that we should be looking to in terms of, residential streets, bypass traffic, streets that carry multiple modes. And then also thinking about trying to be efficient, thinking about the standard treatments, and looking at the city, looking at the list that Shahid submitted, and thinking about all the areas of town where I know we've deployed slow signs, we've deployed radar trailers, where I know that there is a strong or habitual cycle use in areas that could benefit from something like this. Of course, there are many more than we have time or money for, but I looked at the list just as a starting point, and there were a couple that stood out to me as being appropriate. And I was looking at segments. I was trying to be, customized and not just say, oh, the entire street from limit to limit, but try to think of where there's really a need and where there could be some real benefit from some kind of a demonstrator project like this. And then I thought about the northwest part of town and the parts of town where there really hasn't been any safety improvements or treatments or the ability to implement any efforts to calm traffic or improve safety for cyclists, joggers, walkers, etc. So for me, and then there are some streets off the list that I wanted to throw out too. So when I was looking at the list, in no particular order, Oak seemed like a street that might be appropriate, from Fremont to Garfield, because it's primarily residential. It's somewhat wide. It connects to multiple schools and institutions as well as the YMCA, and it's a place where there various modes use it, and there's an opportunity perhaps for speeds to pick up. So Oak from Fremont to Garfield seemed to make sense to me. El Centro from Orange Grove, but just to Glendon. And the reason I looked at that block is that's a block where the speed feedback trailer has been repeatedly deployed. We have Orange Grove Park on one side and single family homes on the other. And it's a well-used thoroughfare. And I see lots of different types of travel on that street. So that seemed appropriate to me. Diamond, from Pine to Oak, I noticed is very wide, and perhaps could use some help. I don't know about the various modes, about how often it's used by cyclists or others, but it seemed quite wide, and it is, of course, close to schools and Holy Family and so forth. And therefore, maybe that makes some sense from Oak to Pine where it's wide. And then again, from Oak to Rollin, where again, it's residential, just like that first segment. It's residential and it leads up to the school. And so maybe there's an opportunity there. And there I know I think there are class 3 markings in at least part of the street. And it's adjacent to the school. So we know that there's biking and driving and walking and so forth. The other segments that came to mind were Ramona from Huntington to Rollin. We've heard a lot about Ramona, and especially the segment from Huntington to Oak, which is used for stacking, loading and unloading of Holy Family school children as they wait to enter into the school parking lot. And it's very wide and residential. And then north of Oak, it ends at Rollin, and that's exactly where the high school is. And we've heard repeated concerns regarding the use of the street for loading and unloading, and it can be busy. And again, you have people walking, driving, and biking. So it seemed like maybe Ramona might be appropriate. Then the last grouping, which to me is the top of the list, is Grand Avenue from Columbia to Mission. And then I had Arroyo Drive from Columbia to Mission on here, but that parallels Grand. And in light of what Sam just said, my thinking is to drop that. So Grand from Columbia to Mission and Hermosa from Arroyo to Columbia. So Hermosa and Grand intersect. Grand is a very wide residential street, which is very heavily used by cyclists. I think everybody knows that. And it could definitely use some slow streets treatment. Hermosa intersects with Grand and with Arroyo, and it leads up to Columbia and to Orange Grove. And it's a road with partial sidewalks, cyclists, walkers, joggers, you name it. And is also used as bypass. I think on one afternoon, Commissioner Fisher, I and another brave soul took counts of license plate survey, and over 60% of the cars during a 2-hour PM peak period were cut through. So those streets seemed like ones to me that would fit the criteria. They're streets that have not received much attention, but are in need of some, and perhaps could benefit from this. I know I've listed way more than 2 or 3 residential streets. And then I'll end in a second, and I want to hear what everybody else has to say. My thought is Grand and Hermosa are at the top. Then I see Ramona, El Centro, Oak, and Diamond. That was sort of the pecking order in my mind. And again, I'm looking at the criteria, the use, and where we might be able to benefit from the program and be able to use some of these standard materials and make a difference, because that's the important thing in my mind. So those were some initial thoughts I thought I'd just share with everybody, and now I will open it up and listen for additional comment and thoughts. Commissioner Fisher.
So, Chair Abelson, I generally like your approach with some modifications, but help me out. Where in the list does it include Hermosa? On which line is that?
So I would, like priority wise, is that what you're saying?
Does the
John?
list, does the written list include Hermosa currently?
Oh, the list that staff provided?
Yes.
Oh, no.
Okay.
Number of the
Okay.
segments I listed, it does not, they're not on there. So if I
Okay.
didn't mention it, then I went and I drove each one of these segments. And there are a number of these segments. And again, these were all just placeholder segments pulled from a 10-year-old plan that had nothing to do with this program or project. That's why I thought it was so important to go out and actually look. And some of them just did not make any sense to me in terms of why you would implement slow streets. So that's why, if I didn't address the streets, because I went and looked and I could not see any basis for it. If
Okay.
that's helpful.
All right. So as I go through the list, I agree with your top priorities. My approach would be to select 4 streets. Alta Planning told us that they can't do much more than 2, but I think we need more than 2 streets in case they meet with the community and the community, for whatever reason, doesn't want all those devices on their street. I think we need some backup streets to spend the funds. So I would propose that we go beyond the 2, but given the budget realities, not too far beyond 4. On Diamond, I wondered about that because we are trying to address issues around the high school. We've gone out there several times. We've had several recommendations. We've proposed that there be loading zones where they don't exist now, and that might alter the traffic patterns there. So I think we are addressing Diamond in the school evaluation. So I would put Diamond as a question mark in my mind. Oak Street, I don't have an issue with. El Central Street, Orange Grove to Glendon, that's only 1 block. And only half of that block is residentially developed. Now, as you look at El Central Street, you're getting into the restaurant corridor at Meridian. Then you have the school district, you have the senior center, you have the library. A little bit further to the east, you have the post office, you have the Fremont Theater. I think El Central Street necessarily carries some traffic that is coming from beyond the neighborhood simply because of the attractions that it has there that people need to get to. So while I would agree that that half block may have a problem, I wouldn't recommend we do something for 1 block or half a block. That's just my bias on that. On Brent Avenue and Oxley Street, in my 8 years on the various commissions, that hasn't come up as a speeding issue. As I looked at those streets, they have 2-way stop control at every intersection. So I wouldn't consider that to be our top priority. Let me see. Wallen Street, Diamond to Fair Oaks, I think we're taking a look at that as part of the recommendations for the high school. So I would not propose additional measures right now until we look at the measures that we are considering for the high school. And with that, Ramona Avenue is a question mark for me. We are looking at that as part of traffic patterns for the high school. But if it's a consensus of the of the commission that that's a problem that we need to address also as part of this, then I'm open to that. But I do think ultimately we need to come up with only 4 streets based on the realities that we heard from the consultant.
Oh, excuse me. Okay, thank you, Commissioner Fisher. So if I have you correct, I'm trying to keep a tally as we go on, and I do see the hands. I'll be with you in a moment. Grand Hermosa, Oak, and maybe Ramona. Do I have it right in terms of where you are at this very moment?
I believe so.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay,
Full,
I
full
think,
disclosure, I live on Grand Avenue. So,
and I live in a Hermosa.
and I want to make that clear. And should it sink farther down the list, you know, I don't want to be biased in
Fair
my.
enough. Appreciate that. I think Commissioner Liu was next, and then Commissioner Hughes.
All right. Thank you, Chair Abelson. I have a few changes to, I guess, your proposed list. I like
Sure.
Grand. I think Grand's great. I think if we're to go with Grand, let's extend it to Columbia instead of to Hermosa as listed in the memo. I like Oak. I especially like going from just Fremont to Garfield, not necessarily, and kind of maybe not touching that section from Meridian to Diamond, just because of the grades. It's not a popular walking path, even though it is a walking path situation. There's more lighting, but I think Oak would be ideal. I think it's a great alternative in that it's between Monterey and Huntington, two major streets that, you know, people that aren't the most comfortable walking streets unless you go, you know, to Monterey, east of Marengo. I don't know about Hermosa. I'd actually advise not suggesting Hermosa as it's not on the list. I think it goes to the idea of what this program is intended to do, and it's not traffic calming. I think there are, I think that's kind of a different mission. The reason I am kind of down on Hermosa is because, full disclosure, I am a cyclist. I do cycle Grand quite a bit, and I avoid Hermosa. Not because, you know, it's not a calm street, but just because of things that I don't think this effort can remedy. So, such as the grade, the width of the street. It's only 28 feet wide, curb to curb. I don't know what temporary slow streets materials can do for this segment. It may be something bigger, part of a kind of a traffic calming project, like speed tables or speed humps or something along that. But I don't know if we can address that with bulb outs or delineators, especially because it's only 28 feet wide. Anything we do would basically eliminate parking on Hermosa or significantly narrow the street and not allow trash trucks. I also want to warn against maybe Ramona. I do like Diamond. I think Diamond is a street that is it's a good location, although it may kind of be already addressed through school efforts. I am a little worried about Ramona just because based on how cars for Holy Family are currently queuing, I think if we do anything in terms of physical improvements or even temporary ones, like with you know, raised delineators or some sort of thing to narrow the street, we're just going to end up pushing those queuing vehicles into the travel lane as opposed to the curb as they are now, or, you know, as close to the curb as they can get. So I'm a little hesitant, kind of just like devil's advocate. I think Ramona could be harmed by this, or, you know, could create more problems than they solve without further work. I'm also, I want to warn against maybe touching locations that already have a lot of congestion issues, such as pickup and drop offs near schools that would necessitate working with schools. I'm very worried about the schedule, and I don't know if, you know, 2 more weeks of adjusting or trying to accommodate a school's pickup drop off procedure is feasible. So unfortunately, I don't have 4 streets, but I would really prioritize Oak and Grand. El Centro, I think it makes sense, although it is just a block. I guess another street that makes sense for me is actually Brent Avenue. I know we don't talk about Brent very often, but I do like the fact that it is a parallel street to Fair Oaks, a street that nobody really likes to walk on. Well, it's not very comfortable to walk on. I mean, we all walk on because the shops are there. But anyways, I think Brent is a good pedestrian corridor, and just for the fact that it's parallel to Fair Oaks. Those are my thoughts.
Great, thank you. Let's see, I think Commissioner Hughes is up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with a lot of what you were outlining regarding, I think, Oak, I think Grand, I think Hermosa. I do have questions, perhaps Diamond, but maybe again, Diamond factors into, having to involve the school district. I think we can hold on Ramona because of the school district as we look at the school gearing up, and we were going to wait for them to get a few weeks under their belt so we could see how the queuing and everything's going to work. I'd like to maybe think about the Arroyo and the area there regarding calming. We've got a lot of traffic that speeds down, that goes by the batting cage, that goes and makes the turns and such to the golf course and the tennis court, golf, and to the tennis center, and then going up around up towards the hill where we've had a lot of speed monitoring we've had in the past there. We've had the speed monitoring signs and such. And I think there's a lot of traffic that goes through there, a lot of young people, youth sports, that there might be some opportunities to look at those intersections and that area, even if we were coming where you transition from Mission going down into the Arroyo, that we might want to see what could be done there to help with the traffic and calming it and slow and safer, because there is a lot that goes through that corridor there. And I think there might be some opportunities to reconfigure some of that. I know we've done some red striping. We've looked at a lot of different things over the years, but maybe there could be some experimentation again, trying some opportunities to put delineators or other things in that could help with the traffic through that area.
So just to confirm, Commissioner Hughes, this last, these streets that you're talking about here, is it Stony Drive? Does that sound correct?
Yeah, Stony Drive, and then how it goes into the Arroyo at the other, coming down from the north, I guess.
So basically from San Pasqual to the north, Stony all the way down and then up.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
All right.
Because we also have I'm trying to remember the cross street by the bridge over there.
Loman.
Where we have the cross traffic that comes in. I have to look at my map here, but anyway, that whole quadrant has a lot of touch points that I think we could mitigate, where we have a lot of speeding, a lot of, and also, we've got a lot of young people that are there and adults through that whole area. All through the calendar year.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Dunlap.
Thank you. I'm going to stick with my guns and say that I still like my idea of like more localized treatments. I appreciate Director Abbas's comments that treatments at intersections can be a little bit more intensive, but I think that there are ones around schools that are fairly simple. If you think about something in front of like Marengo Elementary, like Marengo at Rollin, that's not signalized, like something there would be pretty simple. In front of Arroyo Vista Elementary, that's El Centro at Coston, you have an uncontrolled marked crosswalk there. You could do some tightening with some delineators, put some placemaking in that space, and it could look pretty cool. So I'm going to leave that option on the table. But for the option, in selecting the streets, I think in some ways like perfection can be the enemy of good with this, and we can be here all night, like trying to get the right list, you know what I mean, for this. And I'm optimistic that some of these might not require a ton of plans, and hopefully just like a quick detail or typical section. I'll leave that up to Director Abbas, and I'm working with Alta Planning and the design consultants to kind of figure out the level of detail required. Kind of looking at the list, and we don't have a lot of data here. I think we have our own anecdotal experience. Certainly Oak Street comes to mind, especially between Fair Oaks and Marengo. I like Ramona between Huntington to Oak because you have multifamily units there. It's pretty wide. And when it's wide, I think you have a little bit more room to do things, to play with quick build materials. You know, some of the streets that might be 30 feet wide, you're not really going to have a lot of room to do unless this commission wants to start taking out parking, which if you want to, I'll support you, but I'm not sure if we can do that in the next couple months. So I tend to like the wider streets. One that might be more challenging or difficult would be Arroyo. There are a lot of cyclists and pedestrians, as you know, using that street. There's limited sidewalks in locations. In some locations, there will be parking impacts there. And some streets I don't see on here, and I know ones that we don't talk a lot about that get a good bit of cut through traffic are the streets south of Huntington Drive, particularly Fletcher between Huntington and Alhambra Road. A lot of people avoiding Fremont, or they go up by the park and then they make a right on Alhambra Road, and they'll make a left on that street and come up by the dry cleaner and Lost Ferret Cafe, and then head east on Huntington that way, or in the vice versa in the morning. So that street certainly gets a lot of cut through traffic. I don't know if we would need a full engineering plan and quick build kind of thing there, but maybe on some of those streets, there might just be an opportunity to do something pretty quick and pretty simple with some delineators and some signs. So those are my comments. I don't think we can make, I think the only wrong decision that we can make here would be to clump, if we're gonna go with two streets, to clump them in the same area. I would hope that that people all throughout the city might be able to enjoy this program. So again, the ones that come to the top of my list would be Oak, Ramona, Arroyo, and some of the streets south of Huntington. Thanks.
Great, thank you. All right, well, I think we've gone around once, if my notes serve me right. So I just want to respond to Commissioner Liu's comments about Hermosa. One of the comments was it's not on the list. Well, the list is really of no consequence. It's a placeholder starter list that does not control this commission, and that was made clear from the beginning. In fact, the number of the streets we're discussing are not on the list. So second, there are bikers that go up and down the street to access Grand and Arroyo. I mean, I live on the street, so I see it. And you mentioned that it's not for traffic calming, but one of the points, and I think Commissioner Dunlap just referred to it, the goal is to make it clear that people and non-vehicular modes of mobility may be in the roadway, and to limit cut-through traffic and encourage the safe sharing of road space. So that's why, to me, the focus should be on 1, residential streets, 2, residential streets that suffer from bypass and cut through, and 3, streets that have various modes of travel on them that we want to protect, right? Those seem to be the primary criteria to use. And the challenge, I think, is everybody made some really good points and come up with streets that would benefit. It's just a question of what we can all agree on are some streets to put at the top of the list for Alta to work on, with the understanding that, you know, this is all temporary. And I think Sam mentioned earlier very wisely that the hope and expectation is that wherever these are put in, that if successful, that these are good exemplars, templates for doing similar projects in other parts of the city. So whatever we do or do not get to on this list doesn't mean, you know, it never is going to happen. It just means it wouldn't be part of this pilot project. So, you know, and we talk about 2 or 3 streets. We have, and somebody correct me if I have it wrong. So the existing contract is Mission +1 residential. to be determined. Then the, what we're talking about, this amendment is to add what Alta believes will be 2 streets that can be implemented with this additional funds. So it sounds to me like we have, at a minimum, we have 3 residential streets that we should be selecting or putting at the top of a list. And then if we want to have, you know, lower priority or backups, then we should certainly do that. And then to me, the question of how much money, I guess it really depends on what are we talking about? You know, is it some minimal slow street signage? Or is it something a little more interesting that maybe is a bit more costly? And the other comment that Commissioner Liu mentioned is about Hermosa is the street width, and it certainly isn't as wide as some other streets. But the challenge with it is it is not parked up. So it's actually it's a wide open space for people to fly up and down the street without care to the others that are using the street to travel. And that's why, to me, it seemed like a good place to try something out, because you can put in some kind of temporary neck down or something with striping, you know, with tape and delineators without impacting parking. I mean, I was thinking about other streets too, where it might be interesting to do something like that, but I know parking is a premium in many locations, including Meridian. And to start talking about removing parking, even temporarily, it seems like it's a non-starter for folks. So those were just some initial thoughts, or some additional thoughts I wanted to share. But I'm hopeful we can all sort of come around maybe 3 residential streets that we can all agree on to start with, and then maybe have a couple behind those as backups in case the first 3, for whatever reason, aren't workable. Commissioner Liu.
Yeah, thanks for the clarification, Larry, on Hermosa. Yeah, I was just, I'm sure your experience on Hermosa is much more informative than mine. I'm just kind of thinking at it from an engineering perspective of what would be feasible, considering the width of the street. And I don't know if we'll get the best bang for our buck by listing this as one of our 3 streets as part of this project, because I honestly don't see anything that can't be remedied by city staff on a much cheaper basis. So for example, a few delineators, some paint, that's, you know, maybe a couple $1,000, you know, like at that, if that, you know, even considering installation. So I completely understand your concern for Hermosa. And yeah, I just don't know if, you know, if this would be, if we should prioritize this over like Arroyo Drive or Grand, if we're going to try and spread it around the city when it comes to making sure we don't put, you know, 2 streets, both of them in one corner of the city on the list, or we count Hermosa and Grand as one street. I don't know, you know, something like that. Just
that's what sort of,
food for thought.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you. That's what I was sort of thinking of, because Hermosa is a short street and it connects with Grand. And so to me, it sort of seemed like, yeah, they're 2 different street names, but it's one route, so to speak. So that's why I wasn't seeing it as a whole separate street project. I was just trying to be efficient too, because it's right there. All right. And I think, and I certainly do not put it above Grand. I think Grand needs it significantly. So my thought it would be an attachment to that.
Oh yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and sorry, I keep doing that. And then Arroyo, I agree too. I was just guided by what Sam mentioned earlier about perhaps not wanting to do it on 2 parallel streets. So that's why I sort of moved away from it, not because it's not deserving, but just to try to keep in mind. And it seems like there are more cyclists, not that the selection is determined by cyclists alone, but that there are more cyclists on Grand day in, day out, and certainly on weekends than maybe on Arroyo. So that's sort of why I sort of focused on the Grand Hermosa thing.
Hey.
Go ahead, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I think maybe a good compromise, and yeah, I was totally thinking of what Sam said when, you know, we don't want to put 2 parallel streets as slow streets. It's that kind of, you know, it's very inefficient and could create other problems. Maybe, you know, if we designate them as like 1A or 1B, depending on the outcome of the public sentiment, during outreach meetings. So if for whatever reason the residents of that neighborhood prefer Arroyo over Grand, then so be it, or vice versa. But yeah, I think it definitely makes sense to only do one of them, but maybe not both. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. From what I'm hearing, a suggestion, what I'm hearing what I'm hearing is the 4 potential. Seems like a lot of consensus for Oak. And then El Centro, the Hermosa / Grand, and Fletcher. And the thinking also is we kind of are covering. So Oak would cover the eastern part of the city, if you will, or focus. El Centro is obviously center. Hermosa Grand would be towards the west, and Fletcher would be towards the south. So that would give us a spread. We're spreading our funding to various touch points in the city and different areas that we could see how different treatments would have success in these various locations.
Thank you. And Commissioner Fisher, I'm going to get to you in a moment. Can I just get clarification with regard to Oak? I think what I had mentioned was Oak from Fremont to Garfield. Is that
Correct?
Is that what everybody have the same view with regard to Oak, or does somebody have a different idea of the extent or the limits? No. Okay.
Yeah, I
So
would
it's
say Fair Oaks to Garfield.
Fair Oaks. So you would exclude Fair Oaks to Fremont?
Yes.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think it's different traffic patterns there.
Okay, so we can talk about that. Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Hughes. I have your notes. Commissioner Fisher.
Yes, before I make my statement, I wanted a clarification from Commissioner Hughes. You championed El Central. Would it be the 1 block between Orange Grove and Glendon?
I think that's obviously a key area that Chair Abelson mentioned, but I also think we could actually go even further. I could see us over more also towards the Fremont Theater, and particularly where we've got a lot of the city parking right there at that intersection where Mama's is. And then what you're seeing a lot on the other side, but often with the Rialto, now that Mosaic is back. I think there's some opportunities there.
Okay, thank you. So just in response to that, I could see a rationale for Glendon to Orange Grove because it's residential. I don't see the rationale for putting it on a street that serves the school district, the post office, the Fremont Theater, and the other activity centers along there. You expect to have some outside traffic there, more than local traffic. So that's just my opinion on that. With regard to Arroyo Drive and Grand Avenue, just a little bit of history. The old Public Works Commission a few years ago had considered measures on Arroyo Drive, and we worked with the community. A consultant had prepared a number of options, and to try to slow down traffic by striping the center line, striping edge lines, striping bike lanes to try to make the lanes look more narrow. And basically the community there didn't want those devices on the street upon which they front. The best we were able to get out of that is a speed feedback sign at a strategic location. But that's something to keep in mind. It may seem obvious that there needs to be some sort of traffic calming on that street, yet we may run into some difficulties with the residents who live there. And similarly on Grand Avenue, that seems like a natural street. There are a lot of bicyclists on Grand Avenue. It's wide enough to put in a center line, edge lines, bike lanes. But there was a proposal to do that a few years ago. And the buzz was that the residents didn't want to paint the bike lanes and the other striping on the street so as not to call attention to it. So there's are those issues to consider. So if we were to keep those streets on our list, I think we would have to recognize that they might fall out due to some community opposition.
Thank you, Commissioner Fisher. Those are good points. And I would say with regard to Grand, and of course, you know your neighbors better than I do, but I know a number of them. I would hope that they would be receptive, whether it's Grand or Royal, whatever streets we end up with, that the residents would be receptive to what was being approached as a demonstration project. And it's, to me, that's sort of the reason to do it, is because we look at the street and say, we think this would be a great opportunity, and the residents have concerns. We put in a pilot project that's removable, and with the hope and expectation that perhaps it achieves the result and the residents maybe are okay with it, because naturally a lot of people don't like change, and then it would be a success. Alternatively, they could absolutely hate it. It would be a failure, but at least it would be tried, and this would be an opportunity to do it without any lasting long-term impacts. Just a thought, and I'm going to get to Commissioner Dunlap. I wanted to respond to Commissioner Hughes's fantastic suggestion about Stony, and the reason that it doesn't, I'm concerned about, is it doesn't really fit as a residential street. It certainly is used by various modes, and it's busy, especially weekends, weeknights, with all the different opportunities for recreation. And I think it would be great to do something to better manage traffic and make it safer for everybody, especially near the park areas. I just wonder whether these funds would be appropriate, since we're supposed to be focused on residential. So I just wanted to address that point. And then before we go to Commissioner Dunlap, I wanted to pick up one of Commissioner Liu's suggestions, which was Diamond. I think you mentioned that as a street that you thought might be appropriate. Would you just please remind me the location or the limits that you were looking at, or thinking about?
Thanks, Chair Abelson. I wasn't that strong on Diamond. I was just kind of pointing it out as
Okay.
a wide street. So you could scratch Diamond from my.
All right. I'm just trying to make sure everybody's heard and acknowledged.
Thanks.
Sorry, Commissioner Dunlap has patiently waited. Please.
Thank you. One point, this is probably a suggestion for city staff. One of the great things about watching TV when you live in South Pasadena is you get to see, you know what I mean, in everything. I saw it in a Lexus commercial the other day. We'll want to make sure that this program is coordinated with anyone pulling a film permit. I would think that we're not doing spending a lot of money doing a demonstration project where they need to film the street in November or something like that. So we might come up with our perfect list, but then there are going to be a lot of things that might muck it up a little bit. So I wanted to just throw that suggestion out there. And I also brought up Fletcher. That street's so narrow, it does have a lot of cut through traffic. There's not going to be a lot that you can do that's like transformative. At most, I think you could put in a couple of delineators at the throat, and then maybe a slow street sign. But to select it as a primary street, we might not get a lot of bang for a buck. And those are my comments.
Thank you. And I wanted to point out that the prior commission was approached by the residents of Fletcher, expressing the concerns you just raised. And in response to that, edge lining was installed that didn't used to be there. to narrow the width of the street, at least visually, and enforcement was picked up. And for whatever it's worth, we haven't heard anything further. That doesn't mean the issue isn't still there, but an effort was made by the city just a few years ago to address their concerns. So I'm glad you raised it. So looking at, okay, I don't see any hands at the moment. So looking at my notes / chicken scratch, I see Grand / Hermosa. I see Oak Street with a difference of opinion on where it starts, whether it's Fair Oaks or Fremont. And then there's some folks that are strong on El Centro and others who are not. I focused on El Centro, that one block, for the reasons mentioned. The majority of it is not residential, right? It's after that. It's commercial. There is multifamily, but most of it is mixed at best. And I'm really not too sure. There were some positive pavement markings and treatment that were installed when the street was repaved a couple of years ago, which I think were helpful. And I'm not quite sure how much more could be done in El Centro, as opposed to a street like Oak, where it's a wide open street. There's been no, but other than the always stop that we know and love at Oak and Milan, that's it. So that street seems like a prime candidate for some striping and treatments like what we're talking about. And I see your hand up, Commissioner Liu. I just wanted to get through. So I've got Grand, I've got Oak. I was wondering, what do people think about Commissioner Dunlap's suggestion of picking a school? Because they're all, well, at least 4 of them are in residential areas and on residential streets. I'm wondering if there's at least one location that we think might be appropriate for some level of treatment. I think Commissioner Dunlap mentioned near the Marengo School and then near Arroyo Vista. I was wondering if anybody had any thoughts. We haven't really touched on that one way or the other. And I see Commissioner Liu's hand up, so I'm just going to take him and we'll see what he has to say.
All right. Yeah, I think that the schools, maybe if we pick one that's adjacent to one of our major corridors, we can somehow incorporate additional features near the school, such as, extra protection for crossings. So maybe at South Pasadena Middle School or Marengo that are adjacent to Oak, even though I know Marengo is just slightly north of Oak. But I raised my hand because I just realized, looking at a map, obviously, that El Centro is a parallel street to Mission. So we would have to be a little cautious of maybe thinking that, well, if Mission is kind of the major component of this program, do we want to also throw in El Centro and kind of throw all our eggs in the central business district? But no, I see that. I could see the desire for it, but I'm just kind of hesitant now because of that point. Thank you.
That's a great point. Thank you. Commissioner Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I think that there might be an opportunity as you look at, it sort of dovetails a little bit differently than Commissioner Liu's mentioning, but in regards to El Centro, we've got Arroyo Vista, which is there. And the other factor of El Centro, if we take it all the way over to where Mission curves, we've got a lot of residential there. We also added the bike lane, was one of the first bike lanes we put in. So we were trying it many years and years ago to move traffic off of Mission and put it on El Centro for bicyclists because of safety and concerns of the train crossing that was a little more congested on Mission vis-a-vis and different from El Centro. So I do think there's some opportunities, particularly as you go more west on El Centro, headed towards, Stony Drive area and over that way. And again, you've got a lot of residential at that end. So I do think there's opportunities where we could do El Centro and touch the school for AV and do some mitigation things there, potential, and then still have, again, even though it's parallel, the whole point of it is that to also make it a very viable alternative to Mission, which was to help the traffic and the congestion on Mission. So I think there's good substantiation of why we could consider El Centro.
Thank you. And good thoughts. My only thinking is that, El Centro, when it was repaved, as you mentioned, I guess it's a class 2 bicycle lane that was implemented, and I think it's even buffered in certain points. There was a huge improvement in the pavement markings and striping along El Centro from Orange Grove to, I guess it's Pasadena Avenue, right west of the school. So I'm trying to, I agree with your concerns. I'm just wondering what more could be done given what's already been done. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Well, maybe
and-
to his point, maybe we could look at the bulb outs for the crosswalks, potentially, if that was one issue. But I'm also thinking you've got the opportunity at the other end of El Centro going towards Fair Oaks, where you've got some crossings going to Mama's over that area. Yes, it's more commercial, but you do have this traffic issue where you could kind of look at the whole corridor area there and see what you could do to mitigate the traffic in that whole quadrant.
And what is your thought about Commissioner Liu's comment that there's some significant work that's being suggested for Mission Street, which is, parallel and 1 block north?
Well, I
What do you
think
think about?
I think if we look at our traffic, and I guess this would be a question for Shahid or Ghassan, would be, what I think the traffic counts on El Centro are pretty good. I mean, I think we've got, for our east-west, I think obviously Mission, we've got El Centro, we've got obviously Monterey Road, but what are those that are getting high traffic? Where we've got, again, cut throughs and as people going back and forth to justify, again, wanting to slow this area that is dovetails residential and commercial.
The El Centro has a considerable traffic, all kind of traffic, bike, pedestrian, and vehicular traffic. Also keep in mind, any traffic calming measure or reduction of capacity on Mission, the Centro will be directly impacted by that. The traffic may shift over to El Centro. So it's a commission choice, but anything we do on Mission, the Centro will be get the first impact.
So do you see that as a hindrance in wanting to also impact El Centro at the same time we're impacting Mission? Is that your concern?
No, my concern is, El Centro may not impact that much onto the Mission, because that capacity and given traffic, I think, is good enough for El Centro. But Mission, if we reduce the capacity, because Mission is our major arterial and there's a lot of traffic, and if we try to reduce that, and then the obvious choice for them is onto El Centro by car. So that's my that's what I can see. So if you want to do both together, the pier, that probably maybe is worth considering. It may be not your top priority, but one of the priorities, look into that and see what happens.
Okay, thank you.
Because they're doing a traffic study, and the traffic study is also taking El Centro into consideration.
So, and then I'm going to get to you, Commissioner Fisher. Maybe what makes sense is that El Centro be looked at as part of whatever is done on Mission. And, there's going to be this traffic study. And if it shows impacts on El Centro, then perhaps it will also recommend options for addressing those impacts. And then maybe that's something we can work off of. I don't know. It's just a thought. The one thing about El Centro that's also interesting, between Glendon and which, the railroad crossing, and I think it's Fremont, I believe there is an all-way stop at every intersection already. So there's a lot of control, but that doesn't mean that it could not need additional assistance. I just wanted to throw that out there. So, okay. I've got El Centro down here. Commissioner Fisher.
Yes, we've heard a lot of good ideas and a lot of good thoughts. I suggest that we keep focused on the primary intent of this funding, and it's residential streets, bypass high-speed traffic on residential streets. And the idea to look at the 4 schools is a great one. The schools certainly need to have a focused, tailored study conducted at each of them to look at additional controls or measures that should be taken. That should be undertaken, but not part of this project. This project is for residential streets to try to restore the amenities that residents expect on low volume streets. And with regard to El Centro, I would offer again that El Centro is one of these hybrid streets that has some single family residential, but it has a school, it has the post office, it has the theater, it has a number of attractions where you could argue people accessing those facilities are not bypass traffic. The only time I use El Centro is when I'm going to the post office, Nicole's restaurant, or the library, and I'm not bypass traffic. I'm traffic that legitimately belongs there. So I think El Centro is in a special category all itself. And also keep in mind, from time to time, Mission Street is closed for special events, for the car show, and we expect to route traffic onto El Centro. So I think it's a special street. I think it's unique. I don't think it fits quite precisely the guidelines that were intended for this funding. So I suggest we not focus on the schools, although those are legitimate things we should focus on in the future, and that we not include those kind of hybrid streets that serve a multiple purposes.
Okay, so I'm going to do my summation and then we'll see where we are. So I have consensus around Grant Avenue and Hermosa. I have consensus around Oak Street. Can I, John, can you live with Fremont as the starting point instead of Fair Oaks? Or is it very important to you
Yes,
that we start there?
I'm not going to arm wrestle over that one.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have 2 where there's consensus. Then we have these other fantastic ideas that we need to sort of try to coalesce, assemble, and move on. So
We have 3 with consensus, right?
I'm sorry?
We have 3 with consensus, Grand Hermosa Oak, correct?
Okay. So does anybody want to, and I know El Centro is important to Kim.
I'll be flexible.
I'm just trying to make sure I'm not missing something. I mean, if this is all we have, this is all we have, and there's nothing wrong with it. And it sounds like it beats what we're being asked to provide. But should we, other than these 3, have 1 or 2 more on here as, you know, lower priority in case? And if there were to be, I'm trying to see which ones were relatively okay with folks.
Well, Johnson recommended Brent. We hadn't really talked about Brent, but it's obviously, you know, mostly residential. So I don't know if there's maybe an opportunity to use that as a experimentation location to try some of these measures.
Commissioner Liu, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think Brent would be a slightly different one that makes sense to me. Actually, one side of Brent is commercial. It does touch the back of a lot of the parking lots of Fair Oaks, but yeah, I think it could have potential. And I think if, like Commissioner Fisher said, if Grand falls through based on community pushback, then maybe we do move further down the list and maybe look at some north-south streets, kind of like Fletcher, as Commissioner Dunlap mentioned, or Brent, or any other street. So.
Okay, and Brent, it's just one short block, right? El Centro to Oxley, is that one block? I just want to make sure I have it right, that's all.
I don't mean to interrupt, but Commissioner Liu, like Brent's so narrow that there's not going to be a lot that you can do on Brent, right?
Yeah, I just always thought of it as a weird street. So, but I saw it as a street that had a lot of potential. So
Sorry to speak out of order.
Oh no, totally fine. I
We'll allow
didn't
it
really
this
have
one
a
time.
segment for Brent. I just kind of threw out Brent as, from possibly like Mission to Monterey, or I don't know. I don't know much about Brent. I kind of avoid Brent, so. Sorry,
Okay.
residents of Brent.
Commissioner Hughes?
Yes. No, I think that was my comment about Brent. So my hand didn't go away.
Yeah,
That was my comment too. So I think we all raised our hands on that.
What was your comment, Commissioner?
About
Councilman?
Brent, about Brent. I think we all saw the very limited potential of Brent.
Right. Okay, so we're back to where we were, Grand Hermosa Oak. What about Ramona? I've heard everyone. I just wanted to bring it up because I had it on mind, and I think at least one person thought about it too.
I had it on mine because it's wide, and I think
Yeah,
there's more that you can do there than on some of the narrow streets.
right. And I know Commissioner Liu had concerns about how it would impact the Holy Family Church queuing, and that was a very valid concern. I can tell you that I think that folks on Ramona would appreciate. I know we're looking at that neighborhood anyway, as I think Commissioner Fisher mentioned, sort of a bit longer term in terms of how to deal with the traffic flow and what should we do on what streets. And so maybe, because one of the ideas was some kind of treatment on Ramona between Oak and Huntington, maybe that's an appropriate street to put on this list, after these others, to address some of the issues that residents, it is cut through, it is wide. I've seen multiple uses on it. Maybe there's a way to implement some of these measures that might assist. And if nothing else, it's a demonstrator, and it might show that Commissioner Liu is 100% right. And what we were thinking of trying to do on that street won't work because of its impact on the queuing. But maybe that's the street we should include, because it is heavily traveled and close to multiple schools and wide and all that. Is that okay with folks?
Here's what I'm wondering about Ramona. Where we hear
Let me put it
most,
different, not okay.
where we hear most from residents is the reach Oak to Wallen, the narrow reach, where you have the residential homes, versus Huntington to Oak, where you have some mix of apartments and you have the wide street. I'm just wondering if we want to consider Ramona, if it should be from Oak to Wallen.
So I agree with you. But we've also, if you remember, we've also heard complaints from residents south of Oak, complaining about speeding, complaining about the queuing and the inability to get in and out of driveways, and the fact that it's used, for the purposes we've already discussed. So not to disagree with you, but just to suggest that I think we've received input from both sides. So I'm wondering, look, it sounds like this is the bottom of the list anyway. but maybe we just make it Ramona, Rollin to Huntington. What do you think about that? Is that?
I would be
Acceptable?
okay with that as long as the outreach effort included Holy Family Church to make sure that we're trying to mitigate conditions for the residents, but we aren't significantly affecting access to the school. It's a fine line. But I think they need to be included in whatever measures are considered there.
I'm sure Sam would be happy to send them an invitation to the meeting, right, Sam? Okay, so here's what I have. It's not a motion. I'm just reiterating the list, and then we can make an emotion if everybody's not too uncomfortable with it. Brent Avenue from Columbia Mission, Hermosa Street, from Columbia to Arroyo, strike that, from Columbia to Grand, Oak Street, from Fremont to Garfield, Ramona, from Rollin to Huntington, with the understanding that the outreach would include Holy Family Church. And in fact, I'm gonna move that we recommend this list of streets as the streets to be included in the Slow Streets program. Do I have a second?
A second.
If I may make a correction, consider to be included. We may not be able to include all 4 because of the funding issues. So, and this is the priority. Priority 1 is Grand, priority 2 is Hermosa, priority 3 is Oak, and priority 4 is Ramona. So wherever
All right,
we
so-
have funding cut, we'll cut it down.
Yeah, so friendly amendment, these are the streets we are recommending, right, be implemented in the Slow Streets program in the priority order listed. And I think there's a second by Commissioner, there's a second by Commissioner Fisher, but Commissioner Dunlap has a question or a comment.
Yeah, I have a question. If this is taken as a priority order, you know, 1 in Grand, 2 Hermosa, 3 Oak, 4 Ramona. If we can only do 2 streets and the 2 streets end up being Grand and Hermosa, I don't think that's right. I think
That's a good point.
you know
Yeah.
that maybe this not be taken as a priority list or those be lumped in together.
Well, I mean, I was, you know, originally I had Hermosa connected with Grand, but then I separated it. I mean, it seems like if you do one, it makes sense to do the other because they're the interconnect, right? But I totally understand what you're saying. So, I mean, do you have a different, how would
No,
you?
I don't know if it's like, maybe it's not in order, you know, maybe it's just like here are the streets, and then staff in their negotiations with Alta can figure out which ones work for their budget. But if you want to put a priority on it, I would move either Grand or Hermosa down to 4 to make sure that at least 2 other neighborhoods get something before we come back and do the same community.
Okay. And what do you think, and what is everybody, and Sam, I'd appreciate your, excuse me, your input too. What do you think about treating Grand and Hermosa as 1 instead of 2, considering the interconnect and the Hermosa segment is essentially 2 blocks, but I don't know. Do you have any thoughts?
I mean, to be fair, I'm not 100% sure. Again, I am not the one who always primes up our scope items, especially when it involves any level of engineering. That's usually done by my engineering team. So I can't speak to it specifically on their evaluation of how we'll cost that out. But if we want to group them together as a similar evaluation, and then we can bifurcate if we think that maybe one section causes things to go out of budgetary whack, we'd probably focus then on Grand. It sounded like there was a little bit more feedback specifically on Grand.
Absolutely.
So that could be kind of like the caveat with that element that I know internally as staff or as the consultant to work with staff, that is the priority segment. So we kind of prioritize that one first. If it turns out that adding in Hermosa would push it beyond what we consider our scope budgetary limit. So I would go grant first, and then we could add on Hermosa if it still all makes budgetary sense, I think.
Okay, so let me, because that, thank you, and I appreciate Commissioner Dunlap's point, because that's important. So let's do this. So I'll strike, if it's okay, I'll withdraw my motion. Wait a minute, we have a comment from Commissioner Hughes.
Oh, I was going to suggest maybe we kind of reconfigure the motion and say that our recommended list includes the following streets. And we could say with the semi-focus and priority of Grand, and then Oak, and then Hermosa, and then Ramona. But we can put in, we would say that if there is efficiencies that can be obtained by working Grand and Hermosa together, then that would make sense. So that, again, we would have Grand, Oak. So we've got two different areas of the city covered. But if it becomes efficient as they do the planning to put Hermosa along with Grand, then that would make sense. And then if they can work in Ramona, that would be our last projected project recommendation.
I think that sounds terrific. And I'm just trying to distill that into a coherent motion, but I agree with 100% of what you just said. Let's see. Well, maybe the way we do it, I'm just trying to see. So let's see, Grand, Oak. How about this? The motion would be that we recommend the following list of streets in this order of priority. Grand Avenue, Columbia to Mission, with the addition of Hermosa Street from Columbia Street to Grand Avenue, if feasible. Is that okay? Second, Oak Street from Fremont to Garfield. And third, Ramona from Rollin to Huntington. And the only thing I'm going to correct myself. The first item would be Grand Avenue, Columbia to Mission, with the addition of Hermosa Street from Columbia to Grand, unless the inclusion of Hermosa makes it infeasible to implement the two other streets. Is that an okay way to say it?
If that be the case, can we say it's same, or if it becomes infeasible, what you are actually saying, your priority one is Grand, priority two is Oak, and priority three is back to Hermosa, because we have to do other two streets before we get to Hermosa. So then it is 1, 2, 3 priority.
Okay, I think that's what Commissioner Hughes said anyway. So basically the motion is Grand Avenue, Columbia to Mission.
Right.
Number one. Number two, Oak Street, Fremont to Garfield.
Right.
Number three, Hermosa, Columbia to Grand.
Right.
Number four, Ramona, Rollin to Huntington.
Good enough.
How's that? Okay. Can I get a second for that?
Can
Second.
I ask the reasoning behind Hermosa being 3 and not 4?
Well, to me, it should be first, along with Grand. They're the same project.
All right. Yeah.
No, not because I live on it, because it's this. To me, it's same project. I mean, to me, it out of, from a practical perspective, to segregate it or separate. So I was just trying to harmonize everybody's thoughts, but if you have a
Thank
different idea, it's okay. I'm not.
Yeah, I just wanted a
Yeah.
little bit of clarification on that. Thank you.
Okay, because I think at the end of the day, I don't see, a major amount of time, money, or expense being dedicated to Hermosa, and that's why I think it's basically an adjunct to Grand. But I'm trying to address the concern you raised earlier that Kim had a nice way of addressing, which is to make it clear that, we're trying to spread it around. That's all. So I think I made a motion. I think Commissioner Hughes seconded. All those in favor? You say aye. All right. Would you raise your hand? Actually, let's do it this way.
Aye.
Okay. So 1, 2, 3, 4.
Chair Abelson, is it possible if you could just
Yeah.
do a roll call for me since we are on Zoom?
Sure. See how fast I forget the protocols? Okay, would you mind doing that?
Sure, not a problem. Chair Abelson,
Yes.
Commissioner Fisher,
Aye.
Commissioner Hughes,
Aye.
Commissioner Luke,
Aye.
and Commissioner Dunlap.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I think this was a terrific discussion and a lot of terrific points. Staff, do you have what you need from us on this item?
Yeah, thank you so much. We will touch base with our consulting team tomorrow and we'll have a game plan. Thank you so much. I think that's really, really very
Can I
helpful.
make
Thank
one
you.
quick comment, not to interrupt, but one thing is, I think it would behoove the communication as soon as possible to have one of the publications, the Review or South Pasadena, do a story saying that this project is coming in these potential areas, even though, so that the community start having a heads up as we're going into the fall and into the holiday season. Even though I know you'll be having to do individual, but I think it just would be wise to give that notification to the community that these potential projects, these improvement projects, these pilot projects are coming.
Yeah, we can do that. And as soon as we have a contract in place, finalize it, then we will do it immediately.
That'd be a great City Hall scoop.
Yeah,
Item.
that's what we plan to do. We'll do a blog post, we'll do that. No problem.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you all very much. Just have a few last matters. It says 11, but I'm going to call it 2 on the agenda. City Council Liaison Communications. Councilmember Primuth, anything you wish to share with us?
No, not at this time. Thank you all for just being willing to accommodate this early, quick meeting. The council really did want to throw this to the experts to really chew over all the different angles on this. And I'm really glad Mr. Znaimer was able to provide his input. So I'm really happy with the result. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you very much. Commissioner Communications. Typically, I would go around, but since this is a special meeting, I'll just ask if anybody has anything they wish to say. And I see Commissioner Hughes has her hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just as sort of a reiteration that unfortunately I will not be at our next meeting because I'm getting married on the 18th. So I will be in Laguna Beach. Sorry, guys.
Congratulations again.
Thank you.
And we will miss you. Anybody else have anything they want to share with us? Okay, I see no hands raised, so we'll close that item and move to the final staff liaison communications. Anything from staff?
No, nothing for us today. Thank you.
All
so
right.
much. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you all very much. I think we did a stand-up job addressing all these issues, and to the extent that we discuss topics that we could not address or include on a list tonight, I know they're here. They're not going anywhere, and I'm going to make sure that we follow up on some of these ideas, and hopefully over time we can start tackling them. So thank you all, and I think with that we'll call this meeting adjourned. Have a good evening, all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Great to see you guys.